Welcome, everyone, to a special edition of the Low Code Cafe. This is episode number 100. I don't know what it is about round numbers, but anyway, episode 100. July 13th for 2022. Today, we're going to talk about integrate anything Zoom level 1. We're going to build an app that securely connects using the Zoom API, and then start to explore the integration capabilities that you can do with workflows and API endpoints and listings. So I think it'll be an interesting one. But before that, let me just introduce myself. My name is Dale Warner. I am head of support for Plant&App. Today, this event was one we hold every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Central Time, and it's just it's an event we hold for our technical community to show the different ways that Plant&App can be used or is being used. And if you have yes, thank you, happy centennial episode. Yes, thanks, Ben. If you have a use case that you'd be interested in sharing, we would be happy to have you become our guest speaker. We record all these episodes, so there's now 99 hours of excellent content out on youtube.com/Plant&App. You can use that QR code to get there, but it's pretty easy, youtube.com/Plant&App. Subscribe and set that alarm bell so you are the first to know about new content that we post. Today, it's probably going to be disappointing for most of you because it's just me. We're going to do a little bit of a trenches segment, talk about the things that are going on in support, and then we'll go right to our hands-on low-code development and talk about Zoom. There's an opportunity, we have a feedback form, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but there's opportunity for you to tell us what you think about these productions and then what you'd like to see in the future. So watch for that and engage with us that way. But you can also engage with us. There's the chat, the Q&A. You can raise your hand if you want to speak, and then our feedback form. So all those are available to you. And so we go today right to from the trenches. We're skipping the talking about the product. We're in the process of planning the next release. And so when we know more about what you're likely to see, then we'll talk more about that. Today, we are announcing there's a hotfix available in version 1.20, and it will be soon to be released in version 1.21. But this is fixing a bug where in Bootstrap 5 listings, the drag and drop functionality was broken. You could drag one way and not another. And I know we have at least one person on the call that cares about that one. So look for that hotfix in version 1.20. It's out, 1.21 coming soon. Another thing that is going on in support, we've noticed, and first of all, this is upgrade advice. And so when you're upgrading, each step is required. And for most of our clients, that's not a problem. For the Plant&App clients, you use the one-click installer. It advances you from 1.19 to 1.20 to 1.21. You can step through one at a time. For our and now I see Linda has mentioned that we have pushed that last hotfix to 1.20. So now you're the first to know. 1.21, this hotfix here is now available. You should be able to see it. So that's available. So for people who are using our legacy tools, which are Action Form and Search Boost, it's very important that you install each of the updates, that you don't skip any versions. So if you're on 5.18, you want to go to a 5.19, a 5.20, a 5.21. Our developers include steps that need to get you from one step to the next. And if you skip a version, it is likely to cause issues, errors on your site. So we're recommending that. Beyond that, this is a plug for Campfire. Low-Code Campfire happens the same hour every Friday. It's a conversation instead of a presentation, and we have lots of people that show up week by week and help each other. And it's really can be a steering committee for your development or a brain trust. I don't know exactly how best to describe it, but it's a great resource for you, and you You do have to invest your time in it, though, an hour a week. That's all we ask. Here are some links for this episode, and while I'm there, let me go ahead and find them and copy and paste them onto the chat. So they're on there now. So these are the first few are our standard links. You can register for Low Code Campfire, which we were just talking about, but also get to our webinar recordings, the community portal, which is another great place to get your questions answered, and then give us that feedback that we were talking about. Today we're talking about Zoom. So we've got a getting started guide, a Zoom API reference, and also my tool of choice is Swagger Inspector, a nice way to interact with an API to explore it a little bit. Other people use Postman, so there's lots of different choices, but if I bring up Swagger, I wanted to let you know where that was coming from. So with that, I am going to start in on integrate anything, and today we're going to be tackling Zoom. And I have it as Zoom level 1 because I think today we'll get through security and loading some content from Zoom. There's some things that I wasn't able to get done. I think I ran into some security issues, and so we might have a follow-up with additional Zoom, but this is definitely enough to get you started. So the goal, what we're going to do today, is to display our list of webinars on the community forum events page. Now, the events page doesn't exist, and so we're going to create that, but we're going to post our webinars directly from Zoom and display them on the community forum. This is probably not something that's going to stay. This will just be more of a demonstration, but we'll do it, get it done, and show that it can be done. We have plans to expand the community forum to add an events page. It won't just be limited to webinars. So this is kind of an early piece of the puzzle. Before we talk about the rest of that, I'm going to just demonstrate so you know where we're going. On our, this is our clone of the community portal that we use to do our development. And this is a live look at, we're pulling information from Zoom. It has a details button. You can use that, and I'm going to open that in incognito, but you can use that to display, to open up the registration for that webinar. And so that's the kind of functionality that we're going to build today. So that's the target. I'm going to set that aside and then talk about how we're going to get there. And it's easiest, I think, I'm going to work from the bottom up here, and we'll just talk, it'll make sense here in a second. The end result that we're going to do is to create a listing to display webinars. In order to accomplish that, we're going to create an API endpoint on our system to go grab the data from the webinar data from Zoom. In order to create an endpoint, we're going to have to get credentials to Zoom. And then in the process of getting the Zoom credentials, we are going to need parameters for Zoom, the account number, the client ID, the client secret. And so we'll store those away into a token and maybe build a couple more tokens. And then, at the start of the thing, we got to tell Zoom that it's okay to talk to us on an API. So we have to configure Zoom. So these are the steps that we're going to do in order, but it's kind of makes sense to talk about them from the bottom up. All right, let's jump in and get started with that. The first part is we need to configure Zoom, and what I've established, there's a nice guide for this. Take a look at the links that I've sent, but I'm going to see if I can work my way through them without them. The first thing is that you need a role, and a role has to be established by the account owner. Once you have access to the role, the owner or an administrator within Zoom can set it up. And so we need to activate it for server to server OAuth. That's what we're doing. We're having our server talk to Zoom server. So Let's see if we can find that. There's in Zoom, in your Zoom account, under user management, there's this roles feature. And again, it doesn't show up until somebody has created a role, the owner has created a role. But I got Bogdan to create a developer role for me. If I take a look at it, we can see who's a member of it, and that's just this this webinar's address that we run from. And so within the role, there's all kinds of settings, but if you go down to advanced features, there are a number of features that you can use to talk to Zoom for developers. So the one that you need explicitly activated is server-to-server OAuth app. So you would come in and check that, and then you're now enabled to do that. All of these are on here, so we could use it. I was at first tempted to use JWT or another method to communicate, but they are deprecating JWT. So server-to-server OAuth is the way to go. So that's the setup that we did within Zoom. So that's the first one. You need a role and it needs to be activated. We've got that. This is the step-by-step that explains how to do it. The next thing that we are going to do that it would talk about in this create a server-to-server step document is to create an app. So this is done on the app marketplace, and so marketplace.zoom.us, it uses the same credentials that you're logged into with Zoom, so it's kind of automatic here. I'm going to manage my apps. You're going to need to be in develop mode to do this, but we're going to manage, and I already have an app created. It's called the Café app, but you could add a new one here. Where's the, I don't know if I see the new button. Oh, we could add an app. I don't see it. Okay, we can add an app, but I'm just going to edit this one. Click into it. It asks you for your name and this same set of information. So the first thing it does is when you create an app is it creates the credentials that you're going to need. So we'll have an account ID, a client ID, and this client secret. You can specify other information. So the name of the app, what are we going to do? What's its description? This app, by the way, server-to-server OAuth app, is only for internal use. It can't be a published app. So this is just for you to work with your account. So who and email address, things like that. So there's features that you can turn on, and one of the ones that we're not going to hit today is event subscriptions, subscribing to when things happen and get the webhook notifications. So that might be one we'll put off for a future one. And then we have to give it some scopes, some essentially permissions. And so I've given this permissions to all the things that have to do with webinars. I'm a webinar read admin, a webinar write admin, and a webinar token. I don't know. We're not going to deal with live streaming, but I did everything having to do with webinars. You can just come in and start typing what, let's see, if you wanted to add scopes, if we wanted to do meetings as well, there's meetings, and you can just start checking off what you want to do, what you want to be included for. So again, this is an administrator giving out these scopes to the role. And then you come in and activate it, and so the app is activated, and so we have this activated app, and it's all accessed by these credentials. So that is the configure Zoom part. We need the account ID, the client ID, and the client secret, so you record those or pull them from that page. Okay, next step. Now that we've got Zoom set up, we can start working our way through that list. So the first thing I want to do is do some tokens for account ID, client secret. I actually have these. I'm going to export them from clone system so that I can save some typing. So that's the account ID, client secret. And also hopefully so I can do this without showing you all of showing you my client secret, and then I'd have to change the account because it'd be out there on the recording. So we go to Plant an App. Let's see, we're not going to need the marketplace anymore, so I'm going to close that. We go to Plant an App, and this is the community portal. We're going to go to configuration and tokens. And I am going to import my tokens. And now I have to blur that or delete the app because it did show up. Oh, well. So we have the Zoom API that's now been imported, and it has three things. It has the account ID, and this is just a simple token that has it's a constant that has it. This way, wherever it's used throughout your application, if you later change to a different app or disable the app, whatever, it's just in a token, and it's going to be easy to change instead of hunting it down in your app. Likewise, we have the client ID, which you saw previously, and so that's also a constant. And then the client secret, which I am going to skip here. And so this gives us the constants that we need. So that's the first part. But in a moment, when we start working with and asking Zoom for credentials, we're going to need the credentials authorization. And so I'm going to create another token. And again, I'm copying from another system, as I often do. And this is going to be kind of do a little bit of using the base 64. There's a base. If you get into the documentation, it says that you need the client ID and the client secret together in a base 64. If you've never used the base 64, it encodes things. So we have a base 64 encode your text here. You press it and you get a value, right? If you reverse this and say that you want to decode that string, instead of saying encode, we'll say decode. So when you decode a string in base 64, you get back whatever you put into it. So it's a way of obfuscating a little bit a value that you want to pass. So we're going to use the base 64 encoder. So here we go. Let's not search for this anymore. And so we're going to create a new token. The token is going to be called the account credentials authorization. And this is also, it's in the ZoomAPI namespace. And this is also going to be a constant, but it's going to be using that base 64. So what we're going to do is say base 64 encode, and the value is in quotes, and we'll close that off. And I'm just going to test that much so I have good syntax here. But what we want to encode is one of these two, is the client ID and the client secret. So the client ID, I'm going to grab this. Whoops. It's this. And then Zoom, the specification says it has a colon, and then you want to encode the client secret. So when we save and test this, we get an encrypted value. And so this encrypted value is what we're going to need to talk to Zoom. So we've simplified it. We can just use this anytime we want to get our credentials from Zoom. All right. And some of you smarter people are probably screaming at the screen saying, yep, that's a secret too that I just published. So I'm going to have to delete this app. So here we go. All right, so that is the account credentials. So now we're faced with the next step. We need to get our our Zoom credentials, it's probably a really good time to take a look at the Zoom API and see what it has to say about doing that. Anytime you're working with an API from someone else's API, it just requires some discovery. How do you do it? And so you do a little bit of interactive back and forth. How do you actually connect to it? So let's see if I can find where it says how to do this. And it might be OAuth documentation. This is probably where we want to go. I love it. All right, here it took a little searching, but here's the spot where what we're going to use to get the credentials from Zoom. So we need to post to this address with our account ID. We need to send authorization, and the authorization that we're sending is this base 64 encoded, the client ID and the client secret. So we've already prepared this ready to go. And then what we're going to get back is an access token, a token type, an expire, a scope. When I was figuring this out, now I'm going to mention, this is where I used Swagger to get the content originally. I think I can do it today without it. But if you were exploring and you want to pass it and figure out, and okay, this is what I did, and this is how it works, and now I see I'm getting the stuff back. So you could use something interactive and kind of get the feel of it. But I think we can jump right onto it. So what we're going to need is to post to this address, and then include our other content. So going back, we're going to do that in a workflow. It's going to be called Get Zoom Access Token. And so let's go ahead and we'll copy that and get started on it. That's going to be a workflow. It's going to be a new workflow, and I'm going to create a namespace. This is going to be the namespace. Save that and select it. And then the name of this is going to be Get Zoom Access Token. This isn't going to require any inputs because I'm going to just use the tokens. We could pass in the tokens if we wanted to, but I'm just going to directly use the tokens. So the first thing that we're going to do is a server request, and our purpose is a request to get the Zoom that request looks like this, so we'll just copy it and paste it here as our URL. And then for the account ID that we need, and I should have left tokens open, but I'll grab it here. We're just going to use this ZoomAPI account ID to get it. And then you have to be careful to choose. We're doing a post transaction. We're not going to be passing it any data. And what we need, though, is a special header. Again, this tells us what we're going to need. We need a header that says this information in it. It's an authorization header. So we're going to do authorization. So we'll add a header. And what we want to pass is basic plus that string that that is the base 64 or whatever. So basic, and then that that token that we've already created, the ZoomAPI account credentials, that's going to give us what we need. What we're going to get out of that is an output token called credentials, and that's it. So we'll save that. If we wanted to, let's just short circuit this a little bit. I like to test things along the way, and so if we were to look at our output, and so I will create an output called raw. We'll delete this after a while, but this is just for development purpose. And then we will output the credentials that we just got. So we have this one step, and so we'll do save and test and run it and see what we get back. So now we can see exactly what we got back from Zoom. I like to pop that into code beautify, but there's lots of different ways to look at JSON. So we'll put it in here and beautify it and see what we get back. So we got back an access token, which is the thing. This is going to give us permission to do things within Zoom within our app. It is a bearer token type. It's going to last for an hour. And the scope, the rights that we were given, this is the same thing as the scope we defined in the app. So the program can know if it has the rights to do what it needs to do by looking at the scope. All we really care about in this is the access token. So I am going to work to get the access token out, and that's what we're going to return in our workflow. So we will add another step here. The next step is going to be parse that JSON into tokens. So parse JSON into tokens. And the thing that we're going to parse is this credentials. Where did it go? And for simplicity, I'm just going to return that in a base token named C. It's just a temporary name here, but so that's going to parse that out for me. So now I can, in my output, in addition to outputting raw, we'll output something called access token. And the access token is going to be C, and then whatever it was in the JSON, which is, I think I copied it, didn't I? There it is, C access token. Yep. So now if I save and test this, when we run it, instead of getting everything, we're only getting one output, which is the access token, which we can use in our subsequent steps. This access token then is something that gives us rights for an hour, automatically return it. Okay. So that's going to give us the rights that we need to do the work. I'm going to make this easy to consume by returning that value of the workflow into a token. So the workflow gives us all our steps, and then we can just get it as a result. So I'm going to go to tokens, and in my tokens here, I am going to create a new one, and it's going to be called Get Zoom Access Token. The value of it is going to be we're going to run workflow. The workflow is the same one, Get Zoom Access, the one by the same name, Get Zoom Access Token. It's to save calls to Zoom. I'm going to actually cache this. I'm going to cache it for half an hour, even though it's good for an hour. So every half hour, it'll go out and get a new token. Otherwise, it'll just use this token. So that saves a little processing. So let's save and test this. So I click run, And so I get the Zoom access token. It's gotten a result. So now we have a Zoom access token that we can use anywhere we need to, and we're going to need that in the next step. So I'll copy it. All right, so the result of that is that every call to the access token gets the access needed to call the API, and that value is now cached and reused, but it's automatically refreshed. If the cache fails, which will fail well before the hour that the token lasts, we'll get a new token, and tokens don't cost anything. So here we go. All right, moving right along. The next step that we said we needed is to create an API endpoint where we're going to go get all that data. And so that's going to be called the Zoom Get My Webinars. And actually, let's take a look at where this comes from. If we look in the developer documentation and scroll down here and open up the webinars one, there's a list webinars API. So the API says you can use this API to list all the webinars scheduled on or on behalf of or by a user. And it has a parameter called me that we can use to get the value instead of user ID. So we don't even have to pass a user ID. And so this is the one that we're going to use, and so I'll go ahead and we can just open this up and copy it here. So that's kind of how to use the API, and it tells you what you need. We're going to need to use a user ID or the me, and then if we were concerned about having a lot of webinars, maybe we would set a page size or a default. I know that we have less than 30, so I'm not even going to set a page size, but that'd be something to pay attention to if you've got a lot of webinars. Okay, so with that, we're going to go to APIs and create a new API endpoint, going to return our data. So this is a new API endpoint. I'm using the Windows V clipboard, by the way, which very handy if you use Windows. Zoom API, Zoom Get My Webinars. I like to identify that this has something to do with Zoom, and it's Get My Webinars is really named pretty much after the webhook. And if we wanted to be nice about it, we can put that right into the description. Okay, and we look in the documentation, wherever it is, this is a get. So we have to match up what we want to do with the method that we choose. So we'll choose get. Otherwise, we can accept the defaults. We don't want to cache this response. We want it to go out and get the list every time someone calls it. We're going to get the full list. So if there aren't any parameters, we just want to go get them all. And so the first thing that we're going to do is a server request to go out and get that stuff from Zoom. So we'll add server request as an action. And this is so now the URL that we're going to call is the one that we placed on the clipboard a little while ago. And the user ID that we want to use, we don't even have to pass it a user ID. We want to use me. Again, this is something that we could have tested using Swagger interactively if you're doing it for the first time and trying to figure out what it needs. This is also, so now I said the wrong thing. This is a get that we're doing against the API. And I'm going to scroll back up. We also are going to use the data that we're going to return, we're going to use in a listing. And that's the reason that we want to pick get here. So this has to do with how we're going to consume it. This one has to do with what Zoom requires. It needs to be a get. There are no parameters that we're going to have to pass. We're just going to take all of them. But we do need to add a header, and the header is every call after we get the tokens to Zoom is going to be the same. It needs to be an authorization, and then we're going to use that the result, this token that we created. It's the word bearer plus the token we created in the last step. So when we get that, this is going to give us some JSON that is our webinars, and so we can do webinars as the output. Oop, it's not a cookie container, it's a output token webinars, and we're not going to account for any errors in this one, so we're good there. So this gives us webinars, and if we want to see that this is working, again, I like to test along the way, we can add a response, and we'll just create a raw response that says that we want to output webinars. And we'll also output a OK code. And so 2 steps. We will do a server request to get things from Zoom, and we'll output it so we can see it. So now we can go save and test, and get response, and we get a valid response. So that says our authorization mechanism all worked. There's a lot of JSON here. We'll let it go. But we want to get a look at it, so we can kind of visualize it. So we'll paste it here and beautify it. And so we see what comes back from Zoom. We get a page size of 30, where there were 7 records that were returned, an array of webinars. So the webinar of this ID, the low-code cafe, that's what you're in right now. When it starts, and there's a whole thing of occurrences within Zoom. So this is probably showing the start time of the very last one. We'd have to grab the occurrences to be absolutely right on this, but they're scheduled to last 60 minutes, the time zone, the agenda, all this stuff. So this is what's being returned. And if we go back to the documentation and take a look at what we were starting with here, this is what we expected: the page count, page number, size, a webinars array. And so this is telling you what you would expect, and that is in fact what we're getting back, so we're in good shape. So this is a good response, and the thing that I'll just point out before we go on, I'm going to take a look at this again. The thing that we're really going to care about when we start doing a listing is this webinars, this array of information from webinars. And so we'll be parsing that when we consume this API. All right. So this API has been saved. It's called, it's a get API called Zoom Get My Webinars, and it's ready to go. So we've already made it to our last step. And so now it's just a question of creating a listing to display that. It's going to use that Zoom Get My Webinars. And we're going to have to use the ID, the path property, to get the webinars out. But we'll do that here as we go along. So first thing, we're going to create a new page. This is on our website, a page that's going to be called events. And again, this probably isn't going to stick around very long. This is just for showing off, but you'll be able to look at it today. So it's the events page. It's going to be right in the root of our site. We're going to make this viewable to everybody, but admins and our citizen developers can edit the page, and we'll save that. So now we have a new page, and I'm going to go to it. So it's an empty page, and I am also going to change it a little bit for its layout. Don't have to, but yeah, I do. This needs to be, I'm going to do a Bootstrap 5 listing. So we'll go to Page Builder and Bootstrap 5 as our layout, and save that. So we'll get a slightly different layout here. But now we're ready to drop a listing onto our page. And so we'll go in and edit, add a action grid, which is our listing module. And we'll manage it. So the thing that we want to do, we're going to design this from scratch, submit, and the data source that we want to do is a server request JSON. We're going to do a server request to our own server to the URL that returns our webinars. So let's go back and find that. I didn't grab that. If we go back to our APIs and look up our endpoint that we just created, and if you run it, if you do the test, it tells you the URL right here. This is a get against that URL, so we can just copy and paste a little bit. So we want to get our data from our own API. The method that we're using is a get. That was what we defined in it. We don't have to provide any parameters to it, so we don't have to provide a request body. We are going to get, we do need to specify, and this one is not very bold, but the ID property is required, and you'll start seeing errors if you don't. The ID that I'm going to pick out here for each row is just going to be the ID property of the output. So I am going to say ID. Might need to be webinar ID. Let's see what it's supposed to be before I get too far down the road. Looks like ID is going to work. So I'll just put ID. And then it says we need to provide a base name. This doesn't really matter, but it will show up. So I'm going to say webinars as the base name for the thing. But here's the key one, the path inside JSON. Provide the path inside the JSON. So we don't want to use all of the JSON. We only want to use webinars. It's at the first level. So the path that we want to do, and it gives an example, if it has an object called results, then you want to say $.results. So in our case, we want to say $.webinars. It's not related to this one. It's related to this one right here. So we want to pull out webinars, and that's it. So this is our data. We can hit save. And it failed, invalid access token. And it didn't like that we went to Zoom. So maybe we have some testing to do again here. I'm going to get our response back. It says invalid access token. I am going to question my logic about caching. And when you're having issues with caching, the easiest thing to do is to turn it off and then turn it back on when you get towards production and test it again. So I'm going to turn it off to remove issues. I think it was this one. So we will edit that one. And we will not cache this. See if that resolves our problem. So going back to our API, we're now getting a good response. So now we can try this again. So we'll try and save our listing data source. And now it's happy. So something I did there with the caching was making it crazy, and we'll have to go back to that. So this is going to be our webinars. Give things a name, the webinars listing, and we can choose some data fields that we want to include. And for the ones that what we're doing, we're going to want things like the ID. Let's see how webinar shows up in the name of these things. So ID, let's see, we'll also include the topic, our start time, duration, sure, time zone, agenda, and then we're going to want this URL. So not everything, but we'll add these to the list. And then, well, we can clean it up a little bit here. This is the join URL, the agenda, time zone, you guys are pretty quiet today. If you have questions, it'd be a good time to punch them in because we're coming to the end. The topic, and then this is just the ID. All right, so we'll save all that and go back and take a look at our work. So we now have all this information dynamically coming from Zoom. Just for fun, we have this one that says sample. So if I were to go to Zoom, let's just add a tab here. And find it in our list, account, webinars. So I have this sample webinar. If I were to edit this and say, we'll make some changes here in it, and where do I save? Save. If I refresh this, we see it come in with changes. So this is dynamically reading from Zoom. So if you left now, you would know how to talk to Zoom. We'll do a couple of more things here. I like this. I'd like this link to be an actual link. And so the way that I'm going to do that is within our webinars listing, we'll add a detail column, a detail button. So we'll go to the, so I'm going to add a special button, and it's going to be the inline details. And so it gives me a details button. We could style that a little bit if we want to, but we don't need to. The custom detail, it's empty. And so we're going to create just a one that says the join URL. And what we want to do is create a hyperlink. So the field in question, if we look at it, the data is called webinars join URL. And so can I copy that? Yeah, almost. So in our button, in the definition, we'll switch over to HTML, and we're going to create this as an anchor tag. So we'll add an anchor and the href for this, the URL that gets clicked, is the webinar join URL. So that's going to get substituted in there. And then I want this to go to a new page. So I'll say target equals. Look at a source like iDocs or whatever to take a look at how to define an href and anchor tag, but that's just basic HTML. So this custom detail view is going to be connected to a button. So we save that, take a look at it. So now we have a detail button, and we'll be able to get rid of this column here in just a second, not show it here. We'll click details, we'll have a join URL. And if we open that, actually, I'm going to go do this on my, this is a test only one here. And so we have a webinar registration. So a page generated by Zoom that's giving us how to register for it. So somebody could come in, use this webinar's listing to go ahead and register for it. So a little bit more cleanup. We can get rid of the join URL. I think I can just remove this. And we don't really need the ID as part of this, so we'll, as part of the visual output. And let's just make sure that I didn't break anything. Yep, getting to where it needs to go. So we end up with our topics, our start time. Again, I said we have occurrences issue that we're going to have to clean up. Duration, time zone, agenda. Maybe we don't want time zone to be present, so that could we could add that to the details and continue to clean up what you see right off the list. Okay, so we're 52 minutes in and we got there. So we let's see, I'm going to go back. We did all these things. We configured Zoom, we made some parameters, we got our credentials from Zoom so that we could make more API calls. We made API endpoints to get the data from Zoom, made a nice listing out of off of our API endpoint. If we were going to do kind of thinking about next steps, it'd be great to be able to retrieve who attended our webinars or people who said they were coming and didn't come. All that's available through the API. It would be great to be able to control and create these webinars. So rather than somebody having to, if we were doing webinars all the time or meetings, a dynamic meeting, we could make a nice interface and click and create one on the fly, maybe send the meeting notification directly to the client. That'd be something I think real handy out of our ticketing system. So if I wanted to meet with somebody, just click and go. And then the ability, just exploring all the webhooks, because I think there's a lot of information that Zoom has about who signs up or leaves or attends. And so we'd be, or viewing, so we'd be able to capture lots of information directly from Zoom. I mentioned in terms of limitations, we didn't really support high number of webinars, so that'd be something to clean up, as well as our caching and adding some error checking, things like that. So there's always room for improvement. Okay, we are 6 minutes early. If anybody has a question, now's the time. Otherwise, you get 5 minutes back for your Wednesday. Okay, well, there's an opportunity. I'll just tell you again, as always, there's an opportunity to talk about this stuff in the low-code Campfire coming up on Friday, this same hour. And so if you want to engage there, please do. But do help us provide some feedback, and happy low coding. We will see you next week. Thanks, everyone.